Kia ora, welcome to the panel on RNZ National. Lana Searle and Alan Blackman on today. Now to this first, Hamas gunmen entered Israeli territory and towns on Saturday, and rockets being fired into Israel in the biggest attack in decades. The death toll has reached more than 1,100 people. Thousands more have been wounded on both sides. More than 250 bodies are said to have been found at the site of a music festival where dancers were taken by surprise by Hamas gunmen during the early stages of the attack into Israeli territory in the weekend. Minister Nanaia Mahuta's first tweet on social media was criticised as being too lukewarm considering the scale of the attack. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins on Sunday afternoon told reporters that New Zealand condemns unequivocally the Hamas attacks on Israel. We are appalled by the targeting of civilians and the taking of hostages, which violate fundamental international humanitarian principles. So a developing story of this with us. Jeffrey Miller is a geopolitical analyst at the Democracy Project who writes on New Zealand foreign policy. He did an article on this featured on the RNZ site this morning. Jeffrey, welcome.
Good afternoon, Wallace.
Well, good to have you here, Jeffrey. The Security Council has met on this issue. They've acknowledged this as a game-changing moment. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, you have to go back to 1973, to the Yom Kippur War, to find any comparison to what we've seen now. I mean, those numbers you were just reading out are just staggering. The loss of life, 700 Israeli lives have been lost. Of course, several hundred Palestinian lives have now been lost in the retaliatory attacks by Israel. You know, to put that in context, you know, those 700 Israeli lives that have been lost now, you know, that's already a quarter of the entirety of the Yom Kippur War, which went on for 3 weeks back in 1973. So, and this is just 48 hours into this conflict. So, you know, it's just horrific what we're seeing.
I see, I'm looking at the latest BBC, the US says it's moving an aircraft carrier, ships and jets to the eastern Mediterranean. Jeffrey, is there a risk that this escalation could broaden or indeed become a wider conflict with an even greater impact?
Yes, I think there's a huge risk that this conflict now could spiral into war. It could spiral though out of control, could bring in some of these other players like Iran. Remember, Hamas is a terrorist group in control of Gaza, but it's very much supported by Iran. That's where all the rockets and the arms and weapons come from, is from Iran. So, you know, if Iran became involved directly here in the conflict, you would end up with a state-to-state conflict, Iran versus Israel. I mean, there's so many known factors here, and it could get very, very nasty. It already is bad enough, but it could get a lot worse than what we've seen already.
On a panel, they might want to question a thought, Lana.
Just wondering about our international commitments here. Of course, we've condemned it. That's the first move. But from that point, Jeffrey, what can happen from here? I know it's early days, but a lot's been done already.
There's not a lot, of course, New Zealand can do right now. We've used our voice. It took a while to get there yesterday. Nanaia Mahuta didn't use that word condemn, and Chris Hipkins had to tidy things up later on. But we did get there in the end. And look, you know, when you've got hundreds of civilians being targeted, these were not military targets. These were civilians, concert goers, you know, attending a music festival who were massacred there in cold blood. You've got to call a spade a spade. So we've used our voice there and condemned the attack. I think beyond that, though, you know, New Zealand needs to think very carefully. We have our independent foreign policy, and that means doing what we can do best as a small country. There are things that New Zealand can do that other bigger countries cannot do. So, you know, in the end, you know, while there will be a military response now, and there will be a brutal, bloody war between Israel and Hamas and you know, Palestinians led by Hamas, you know, in the long term, we need a durable two-state political solution. Now, that might sound like a pipe dream right now, but if you go back to that comparison I was talking about earlier, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, just 5 years after that, you had the Camp David Accords that led to Israel signing a peace treaty with Egypt. So sometimes the darkest moment really can come before the dawn, and I think we need to be optimistic and be ready when there is space to do so, to lead that dialogue, diplomacy, de-escalation, and I think New Zealand could play a role in that. I'm not saying necessarily New Zealand will be able to lead that effort, but in concert with other countries, you think of the likes of Norway, Ireland, other small democracies, I think New Zealand could do a lot there.
Right, yeah. Alan?
Well, I guess my feeling is that we don't really need to take sides on this, because we can both advocate for Palestinian statehood and we can absolutely, utterly condemn the evil actions and inhuman actions that Hamas have taken. And I think the whole taking of hostages thing, I think everything is going to hinge on that, what happens in the future. According to some reports, there are hundreds of hostages have been taken. They are going to be somewhere in Gaza, and by God, I feel for those people, because they are going to be hostages for possibly years. They were talking earlier today about an Israeli soldier who was held for 5 years as a hostage, and Israel, what can they do to save these people? Everything is up in the air, and it's just madness. It's just utter madness. And if Yitzhak Rabin hadn't been shot by that deranged Israeli guy back in about 95 or whenever it was, then this surely wouldn't be happening now, because everything was well on the way to at least some sort of closure, I think. But this is
pretty
just
dark
sad.
days. Yeah. Just in terms of, this is going to likely continue for some time, Jeffrey, and we have an election in 6 days. Will our response to this new war be one of the New Zealand government's first challenges, or is this actually a reminder of how central foreign policy does need to be?
Indeed, foreign policy is not typically a big issue during our election campaigns, and this campaign has been no exception. Apart from 1 or 2 questions in the debates, we haven't really had foreign policy as an issue. But suddenly, it's burst onto the campaign in the final week, and it will go on. It will be one of the big challenges for the incoming government. They're not going to have much time to get their feet behind the desk. We're going to have a new foreign minister ready to make decisions on how New Zealand responds and acts in the days, weeks, and months, probably years to come. This will be such a transformative event. It will go down like the Six-Day War in 1967, like the Yom Kippur War of 1973, 2023. This war that began on Saturday will be one to remember, sadly, for all the wrong reasons.
Nice to have you on the program, Jeffrey. Kia ora. That's Jeffrey Miller, a geopolitical analyst at the Democracy Project. Wrote an article around this issue, which is on the RNZ website. 16 past 4, the panel, RNZ National. We have